Hey guys, so a question I sometimes get asked about military sabre fencing is why aren't there more close-in grappling, disarming moves, and why isn't there more offline footwork? Well, fundamentally the answer to that is the lunge and recover system of footwork that it uses. Generally speaking, if you're keeping one foot predominantly in front, it becomes, relatively speaking, less practical most of the time to traverse, but that's not saying we don't do it. In fact, there are systems which have traverses. If we look at Roworth, for example, one of the earliest British sources for sabre on foot, that has traverses in it. Hutton makes reference sort of a little bit to traverses, and indeed they're sort of implied in weight a little bit as well. Definitely, certainly without question, when you're going against someone using a bayonet on a rifle or a musket. So absolutely traverses exist in military sabre fencing. If we look abroad, if we look to Swedish military sabre or indeed German, Prussian military sabre, so for example Christmann, then we see in fact lots of traversing being used with the sabre, and we find this equally in the Spanish material inspired by Destreza. So it absolutely does exist, but I think it is true to say that if you've got a relatively light, relatively quick, one-handed weapon with a handguard, that means that your weapon's being kept out in front of you a lot because you've got a handguard, you're able to do that. If you're using lunge and recover, you don't spend very much time with your body or your limbs or your weapon in a distance at which you can easily be grappled. So generally speaking, you could say that the lunge and recover style of footwork, which really comes about, it evolved out of, I suppose you could trace it back to all the way back to medieval fencing, but more directly to small sword and late period rapier footwork, and that was translated there later into backsword and sabre. It is quite a good kind of anti-grappling style of footwork, so it actually makes grappling quite difficult. This being said, it does happen, and what I've done here is the other night we had a Christmas bash and we had a bunch of fencing, and I videoed quite a bit of it, and this is purely showing two examples that came up of close-in blade commands and not grappling as such, but close-in actions. And this is me fencing the first time against Stephen, the second time against Martin. I haven't shown the full fights, so bear in mind that this is just two things that I did in that fight. I hit them lots, they hit me lots. Most of the hits, cuts and thrusts that were exchanged were done with the sword, with no blade commands, no close actions at all. And they hit me lots and I hit them lots. So don't think this is me showing me beating up my students, because it's not that. It's purely that in these fights, it shows two of these examples of close-in actions in sabre fencing. So let's take a look. So in this encounter I'm fencing with Stephen, and you can see that I try to get a bind on his sword. There it goes. I'm trying to get a bind to try and get a thrust in. However, he denies me the contact. I try to go for his head and he tries to cut my side, but I step in too close. So let's have another look at that. So as he comes up, you'll wait for his cuts to my side. You'll notice as I sense it coming in from the bind, I feel it coming around, so I step in to level with his hand, and that enables me to do a disarm and cut to his leg. In this example with Martin, I extend my sword attempting to thrust him in the face. It misses and goes over, so I turn it into a slice across the face, and you can see there I bound against his blade, so I grab it at the same time and draw my edge across his face, at the same time as twisting his sword in his hand. Again here you can see the sword's being twisted backwards, so he has little power to resist, and my blade has just sliced across his face, but initially I was trying to put the point in his face, but I missed. So sometimes you can turn one thing into something else. So I hope that was interesting. Just a little example to show you that, you know, disarms and grappling and close-in actions do absolutely happen with sabre, inevitably, just with all swordsmanship styles. And these are just two examples, but just to reiterate, lots of things happened in that fight, and they are unusual. They don't usually happen in sabre, primarily because of the style of footwork that we use, which means we get in very quickly and we get out very quickly. And it becomes relatively difficult, actually, safely, unless you really force it to happen and charge in like a lunatic. And I have to say, say I do see some people fencing Sabre like they are kamikaze lunatics, and obviously if you charge in like a kamikaze lunatic, you're going to get close to the person, but usually you'll get run through or cut in the legs or cut in the head at the same time. So it's generally speaking quite suicidal. But sometimes it just so happens that an exchange of cuts and thrusts and parries and wards happens in such a way that you end up quite close to a person, and you can engineer it to happen in safer ways. There are certain guards, there are certain binds against the other person's blade which are safer to close in behind than others. Anyway, I hope that was interesting, and see you for the next video. Cheers, folks. Thanks for watching. Please subscribe. We have extra videos on Patreon, and you can follow us on Facebook.